You're good. Oh, they missed that really great, um, awesome introduction by you, the recording people. But hey friends, how y'all doing? So here's the deal. I want this chat to be live because other than the chat, this is not really going to be an engaging presentation. It's just going to be me talking to you all. um, and yeah, and I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit of my story, who I am through this process, and all that jazz. So, but first, as Jess said, my name is Mo, M-O, no E, if you're spelling it. And um, yeah, and what do? I work in Slice. I do a lot of stuff around leadership, and I like to tell stories. And so this essentially is going to be a presentation of me telling stories, some stuff that I've learned over the past couple of years, and specifically over the COVID time, and how I am choosing to engage in my sphere of impact. And so with that, first, wanting to kind of get folks acclimated to the Zoom platform. For those, some of you may already be really familiar, but some might not. So first off, you may choose to unmute yourself or mute yourself. You can stop and start your video at any point. I'll be honest with you, I can't see you, so it doesn't matter to me. But I just also want to note that chat function. Again, that's where the liveliness is going to be here. Please don't hesitate to put whatever you need in that space. Let's see, Jess, anything else I'm forgetting here?
I think you're good.
Okay, great. And so as a reminder, the hope is, even though the chat's going to be live, wanting to make sure that you all are or that we all are abiding by the principles of community, of inclusion, integrity, respect, service, and social justice. Yeah, we'll see what's up with that. So, cautiously optimistic. Yeah. Let's see. Where do I want to start? So I've chosen to be cautiously optimistic. And I've always lived my life in a space and time of wanting to, of just being real and just recognizing that whenever something is going on, I'm like, I have sometimes been the person who said, but what about? And when you look at a glass of, or a glass of water, half filled, is it half empty or half filled? And for me, sometimes when I'm not catching myself, I tend to look at the world a little bit more pessimistically and saying it's half empty. And I've been really sitting with this term optimistic and what that means for me. And and so for me, I've played around. I've heard some people call themselves possibilist, and I'm like, that's interesting. I could be down with that word, and played around and said, maybe I can identify as a possibilist, and it just didn't feel good for me. It may feel good for other folks. I also heard the term of realist. I'm just real. I'm just recognizing kind of what's going on, and that too was just perhaps a little bit too leaning on the kind of a pessimistic type of term. And no knock on it if you identify as a realist, but I was looking for something for me. And I also happen to run this program that has used this term of optimism as a leadership virtue. And I've been really, when I first adopted this program, I was like, that's a really interesting word. And I had to play around with that. And then I had some colleagues who I would say who were eternally optimistic. And whenever we shared certain spaces, and had different types of conversations, I appreciated the ways in which they came into the conversation and were able to see all the, again, possibilities that could occur if we did certain things here and there. And so with that, I'm not fully an optimist, but I would say I'm playing around with cautiously optimistic. And I might get to a definition at the end of this, but again, it's still something I'm working on. And so I'd love to hear in the chat, what are other words or descriptions that you've seen that describe your, um, in terms of how you might describe yourself? And so, and I'll put that in the chat. And so while I continue on, that's where we're going. And so for me, my story starts with a misunderstanding. My story of optimism starts with a misunderstanding around living my life with thinking that these two words were kind of in really well, they're in relation with each other, but they're kind of two sides to one coin: success versus failure. Um, and so through school and family, somewhere along the way, I learned that if I didn't put 110% into achieving a goal, I was considered a failure. And so some examples, right? If I didn't get an A, I was considered a failure. If I didn't win the game, a failure. Didn't get the job, a failure. And after a while, that kind of thinking makes one put it all on the line. It makes you give more than what you could possibly um, uh, yeah, give more. Again, that 110% concept. And also, this kind of thinking is a classic example of white supremacy culture and its reliance on perfectionism, a sense of urgency, defensive. It makes you focus on quantity over quality. It makes you do kind of like this either or thinking. It makes you want to hoard power and information. It makes you focus on individualism, like it has to be me, it can't be anybody else, um, and so much more. And so essentially, it this kind of this thinking of this dichotomy of success versus failure uh, brings up some of that imposter syndrome that was talked about earlier, that thought around like I don't belong here if I can't make, if I don't have a vision, or if I don't make this, if I can't make this thing a quote unquote success, whatever that thing is. Um, and so late in 2020, I was introduced to a researcher and creative scholar named Dr. Sarah Lewis, and she wrote this book called The Rise. And I haven't read the book, but I've listened to her speak on the Dare to Lead podcast if you are into podcasting, and so definitely check that out. But in that podcast, she says failure was never meant to describe the human experience. um Etymologists, or people who study the history of words, they note that the word failure was originally used as a term specific to banking. And in this case, businesses would fail, investments would fail, but people were not meant to fail. It was never supposed to be ascribed to people. And somewhere along the way, when our society started to uh, connect business and businesses with or what we do with our own personhood, essentially, the word failure started to be used to describe this human experience, the people, essentially. And failure is interestingly rooted in our love affair with capitalism. And while I'm not here to talk about politics, but if on a side note, if you ever want to, I certainly will. But this knowledge is something that made me pause for a moment and want to recognize this, and pause for a moment and question this relationship that I had with this word failure. Um, and so Dr. Lewis went on to correct this false dichotomy, success versus failure, by noting that the opposite of success is not failure, it's mastery. Mastery is is noted as or should be essentially the end goal, and success and failure are just experiences or opportunities to experiment that get us to that end goal of mastery. um, One cannot think to achieve anything worthwhile without some aspect of experimentation, or recognizing that we're going to make mistakes, and yes, sometimes fail at moments. And so, but it's crucial that we begin to start to separate ourselves from the shame that society and systemic oppression has intertwined with the mere thought of failing at something. And For me, when I think about shame, that's exact. When I think about when that word was introduced to me, I didn't have the thought process, or I didn't have the experience to really think like that is what I was connecting with that, but it was shame. I was shaming myself first before I felt like society could shame me in that way. And so again, mastery should be the end goal, and success and failure are just part of that journey in getting there. And so I sat with this information for a long time, and I wrote pages. I'm a writer, and so I wrote pages and pages of how much of a failure I felt like this past year during COVID. In fact, there's this moment that I've told some folks here in this presentation about, but certainly would love to share with you all. Um, at some point, I was in this workshop with a whole bunch of people who do the same thing that I do here at CSU in the audience. And it was about maybe 40 or 50 folks, and they were all just rattling off all the cool and creative things that they've done in ways of programming during COVID times. And I'm sitting here listening to all their honestly like really great ideas, and feeling like, huh, wow, I feel like I might have missed an opportunity to seize this moment to do something really amazing in this moment, that can transfer this program that I help to oversee. And I left that session feeling pretty down, to be honest with you. And I turned to my wife at the time, and I told her how I was feeling, like pretty emotional, and like, oh man, I could have done something better. I could have done something more during this COVID time. And she kindly reminds me all the time, which is great, that I've been right, like the reality of the situation. Like I've been dealing with health issues. Our office and the program that I help to oversee is short staffed. There's a freaking pandemic going on. And I'm also in all this working on a PhD on the side. And so she reminded me that I should go easy on myself, essentially. And perhaps that this year is a year of survival, and not necessarily a year where I should be focusing on mastery, as Dr. Lewis says. And um, uh, so when I sat back and allowed myself to kind of realign what my personal and professional goals were, um, uh, it allowed me to recognize all of those aspects of white supremacy culture that I mentioned earlier that were really affecting the ways in which I engage with my colleagues, or saw the program that I was overseeing. And so with this, I'm interested in the chat, and feel free to share. Like, have you had your own stories of comparing yourself to others, and feeling others during COVID, and feeling like perhaps you haven't missed the you missed the mark a little bit sometimes, or you had to readjust yourself. So feel free to share there. Um, And so, in my conversation with myself about with a desire of wanting to realign, looking at 2021 in a realignment for myself, so that way I didn't necessarily focus so much on bringing the shame to myself or judging myself amongst others. Um, I have a dear colleague who actually works here at CSU. He's a faculty member currently in psychology, in the psychology department, and his name is Zach Mercurio. But he always says you make a contribution every day. He does a lot of research on leadership and purpose, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard him say this to the students that we teach together, or just in actual conversation. But he reminds us, right? You make a contribution every day. Regardless of if it's a survival year or a mastery year, you make a contribution every day. Your influence, or you have influence in how you want to make, uh, or you have a choice in how you want to show up in that contribution as well. And so, with that, in my journal, I noticed that I was writing about how worried I was regarding the product that I was in charge of offering to students and to the world through here at CSU. And so it made me recognize that I was focusing again on the quantity over the quality of my experience. And the questions I kept thinking about in my head were, how many programs can we offer? How many meetings can I attend? How many? How many? How many? And that kind of thinking was making me focus again on that failure or fear of failure. That kind of thinking was essentially a price tag, or has a price tag. It costs us, at least for me, it costs me my health and well-being. It costs us time and money to try to keep up with the Joneses, per se, when you're constantly comparing yourself to others. Essentially, it's not sustainable. Um, and the messages I received throughout my life from society, from media, and honestly, sometimes even from supervisors, trained me to innately desire to perform better always, to perform better always. And again, that white supremacy culture continued to seep in, right? Even though I was aware of it, it just kind of catches me off guard. Um, and so over the break, my wife reminded me again, as she normally does, that I should focus on the process, right? The process over the product. In fact, she painted this picture with the words love over recognition, as a way to remind me that I was always asking her to recognize all the things I did for her. And in all honesty, I she yeah, I was just asking her to recognize all the things I did for her. Like, I would wash the dishes, I would do the laundry, and I'd be like, see what I do to love you. And she's like, you know what? Sometimes you just need to focus on the process and just do it. And I will recognize you naturally. That's not the reason. And uh, so I guess I share that story because this type of thinking, that product over process versus the process over product thinking, was not only affecting my professional life, but it was also affecting my personal life. And perhaps you all have some experiences like that too. But in order for me to break out of the cycle, I needed to recognize how this affected me wholly, right? And I needed this and so many other reminders that the process of getting to a goal is just as important as the goal itself. And so, in choosing process, uh, I want you all to recognize that it is essentially a conscious decision that we have to make every day, because the system is not going to allow us to press pause and do it. We have to actually consciously press pause and challenge the system in doing this. And so, in choosing process, here are just a couple questions that I found that allowed me to realign myself and my way of thinking for the 2021 year. And one of my, I won't call it a New Year's resolution, but uh, a new way of looking at a resolution are, what are the feelings I want to cultivate this year? Again, thinking back to Zach's conversation about you make a contribution every day. What are the feelings I want to cultivate this year? How do I feel when I'm done with my day? Um, uh, and What did a conversation spark for me? And in that, I am taking more time to reflect at the beginning and end of the day is critical, and has been critical for me. And one of the best practices for changing the culture of an organization is, and not just yourself, but if you're a person who leads an organization or directs a program or supervises other people, is doing some of these, what they call micro assessments, in order to do that. And so, for example, like Amazon actually asks all employees a question of the day that helps managers and leadership assess where they are and what's needed. And so for me, choosing process is similar to that type of example. Is perhaps something that you can do with your group of people, and asking them, what are the feelings I want to cultivate this year, and holding them accountable to that process. Asking them, how do you feel or how do you want to feel when you're done with your day? And as a supervisor, ensuring that you're checking in and seeing if there's anything that you could possibly change to do that. Um, and uh, and for me, asking these types of questions has been instrumental in my daily. Well, I'll be kind of honest with you. Maybe every other day, or at least maybe 3 times a week, meditation practice. And so I ask you, like, what are the feelings you want to cultivate this year? And are there any other questions you have used to center the process over product? Let me put those questions in the chat real quick.
I did the first one.
Oh, there you go. Well, there's the other one. So there. Um, and so with that, this is in the abstract of this presentation. I essentially was talking about how we would use hope. Oh, oops. Um, Looks like it did not send, but here you go. I mentioned that I wouldn't use hope in this whole presentation, and this is the only slide where that word actually even shows up. But um, uh, I thought it was important to add here. And so Dr. Kevin Gannon, he's a history faculty member. I can't remember which institution that he's in, but he has written a book called Radical Hope, a Teaching Manifesto. And he says, because I have hope, I cannot abide by the status quo. And because I know what could be, not just what should be. And so for me, because I've chosen this path, because I have a clear vision of what I could be and what should be. Again, going towards Dr. Lewis's mastery piece, I have a vision of what it could look like, and I want to work toward that vision, but without the reliance on this white supremacy culture to get there. And For me, because that kind of culture is legitimately killing me, both in my professional and personal life, sometimes in terms of health wise. And I'm looking to root myself in an optimism that is real, that is radical and transformative, not only for myself, but for the people around me. And that's kind of when I think about that question of what types of feelings do you want to cultivate this year. This is what I want to do. um, And so with that, there are always going to be times in which, because that systems and society are so pervasive, um, this journey is not relatively new for me. Um, it's an old one that I've been doing for, to be honest with you, since I was in college, and I've tried over before, and been sucked back for a variety of different reasons, but mostly because of comfort. And note that one of the characteristics of a white supremacy culture is to have the right to be comfortable. And even as a Puerto Rican and a queer woman, I have found some comfort in the whiteness that is pervasive in higher education institutions. I'm sad to say that, and I look around and I'm comfortable here because, in some ways, I've been successful at learning how to navigate right these white spaces of professionalism. And I can't deny that I've made choices to uphold whiteness at points in my career. And as a queer woman of color, these decisions have maintained the status quo while also harming myself in the process. And so, to shake things up a bit, I wanted to refocus on how do I dismantle white supremacy within myself in my professional and personal life. And looks like, Layla Saad wrote a book on me and white supremacy as a Black woman trying to do the same thing. And so she offers these questions to continuously help us be in alignment. Um, like, what support do you need when you're walking through this process? What healing do you need to do in this process? And what habits can you work on that need to be cultivated in this moment? And so, when choosing to be cautiously optimistic, I realized I needed a support network of my professional colleagues and personal friends, where they're allowed to let me rant and rave, and then hopefully offer insights into contexts that I might not have realized before. I recognized that I needed healing. Right now, I'm prioritizing my health, and which has definitely been a journey. And I'm learning new things, practice practically every month. That could, which honestly could be whole other presentations. But I'm also learning new strategies and habits regarding time management. So that way I'm not, again, focusing on that quantity versus quality. Um, uh, and I can really sit again with this process that is in mind. And um, so with that, that's why I've chosen to call myself cautiously optimistic over anything else, specifically during this time and my journey to get there, and how I hope to continuously engage. An anti-racist framework in an organization like CSU, where our president Joyce McConnell has asked us to continuously work to become an anti-racist university. And so, yeah, with that being said, that's my story. And yeah, Jess, anything interesting in the chat?
Yeah, definitely. So there was some, so at the various points that you had shared throughout of what people, like how they were describing themselves as cautiously optimistic. Some things that people shared are a knee-jerk complainer, but trying to be more optimistic. Ben shared that, sometimes like capturing what is all capturing is if he's ran 10 miles or didn't that day at all. Um, Catherine shared being a workaholic, so it takes a very conscious effort to say no at times so that don't experience burnout. Bailey shared overly optimistic or other times more pessimistic than they would like, and there's just no in between. So those are just Nick shared an emoji too. So Nick, if you wanted to share more about what the emoji means. So those were Paige shared an overthinker, not able to turn my brain off. So those were some kind of things that people shared of, it seems like a lot of us right now are sharing times of just being in our own headspace and not being able maybe to turn off our brain, or just like thoughts that are constantly rolling in our head. So that was kind of the first portion. So I don't know if you want to follow up to that at all.
Yeah, no, that's for real. Well, I think at this point, I would welcome any questions or comments or concerns. Feel free to either let yourself off of mute or, yeah, put it in the chat. I'm open.
There was one question from Mike that said, this is a little bit earlier, but that the suggestion that optimism, I like your suggestion that optimism might or could be a leadership quality. On the flip side, if someone isn't expressing optimism, then are they not exhibiting leadership? So thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really great point. You said Mike said that? Yeah, that's a really great point, Mike. And I think that's something that I was struggling with, right? Of being the director of a leadership program that was touting optimism as a leadership characteristic. And I think one of the things that I've really been sitting with is that connection between optimism and hope. And I think a a leader should be able to have a vision for the future that they can articulate and work toward. And I think um, uh, along with that, being able um, to outline actions that can actually work towards that particular vision is critical. And optimism, the ability to be able to see a problem and be optimistic or cautiously optimistic at saying, you know what, I'll take a crack at that problem. I think is a useful skill for a leader, and that's where I've kind of sat with myself personally. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Correct. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
agree with kind of just being able to give things a chance, I guess, and just being willing to try new things was what I'm hearing. So yeah, definitely I
Yeah,
would.
that's for real. That's for real. I'll stop sharing for a hot second. Um, yeah, yeah. Well, with that, my friends, Jess, do you have any other things that you need to do on your part?
There are, but I do want to give people, just if they're, maybe just taking everything in, I do want to give a little bit more time if people either have points that they want to share or questions that they want to ask you. So I do want to just
Mhm.
give another little bit of a time if people have any follow-up questions.
Yeah.
While people
Thank you.
are thinking, I do have, I guess I should just, before people, just to say, I'm going to put a link in the chat really quick, and that's the evaluation. And that also will give you credit for your attendance for being here. So if you're, I'm not sure, you know, how each department is doing as far as like clocking in and out, but this will be your attendance. So I'll put that in the chat right now.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I also would say I completely forgot. I know I talked a lot about white supremacy culture, and a lot of the information that I was sharing was off this document by Tema Okun, who's done a tremendous amount of work on outlining what white supremacy culture could look like in personally as well as um, organizationally in a professional space. Um, which might be helpful for some folks.
I did put that in the chat when you
Oh,
were
great.
talking about it earlier on, but I
Thank
can
you.
put it in the
Thanks for
chat
catching that.
again. Yes. And I try to do all the links for the books and podcasts and everything you were mentioning in the chat as well. So,
Totally appreciate it.
but the RAM link is where you can track your attendance as well. I'll just.
Yes, please track your attendance. And thank you all so much for listening to my story. I really appreciate it.
There's just a couple things. Oh, and you had shared that in the chat too. Sorry. I forgot keeping track of this sometimes. Avery had shared trying to eat good food, move my body, choose kindness, starting to have confrontational conversations with family to avoid being passive in situations that uphold white supremacy. Also said, you rock, Mo. Sabrina shared, want to eat better and work my body more, improve my health, therefore cultivating feelings of being content and being more sure of myself, especially when I do try to lean into areas of discomfort. Yes, Sabrina, that is so true of trying to make these changes and be cognizant of that when, there is maybe some challenges there. Make sure, awesome, thanks for sharing so candidly and for the inspiration to challenge thought processes and approaches in this new but still weird year. Uh, Curie, thank you for the presentation, especially important message this year. And everyone's just sharing that they're feeling inspired with what your message, Mo. So thank you.
Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. And so with that, I think once you finish out that RAM link, I'll stay behind for a while if you ever want to ask a question or something like that. And don't forget the noon portion. I think the second part of this, you get a choice of 3 different options or 2 or 3 different options. Check that out. And hopefully you have a really great second workshop. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. Bye all. Again, I'll stay behind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.